So we'll go into the Binance Smart Chain hack. Um, as I mentioned, right? Let's dive in. We have basically the headline here, right, is that $570 million worth of Binance's BNB token was stolen in a major crypto hack, is how CNBC put it. So ultimately, this ended up draining about $100 million of BNB, the Binance native coin. And so the thought is that this could have been much worse, and we'll get into kind of the background of the attack, the response that happened, and we can even compare it to some of the other hacks that we've seen as of late. But there's a pretty quick response. The community, acted really, really well on this one. And just for a little bit of background, so for those who don't know, and we'll refer to it as the BSC from here on out, but the Binance Smart Chain is a blockchain that's closely connected with the crypto exchange Binance, if you're familiar with that. And so BNB itself consists of two blockchains, the Beacon chain, which processes essentially simple transactions, and then the Smart Chain, which processes the smart contract transactions. And so what happened here was actually a hack of the bridge between the chains, which we'll get into here in a second. And so let's dive into the attack itself. So the initial funds for the BNB Smart Chain attack came through the instant crypto exchange service called Change Now. So this is where the hacker essentially performed what they call a double spending attack. They stole, and I'll get into that in a second, they stole about 2 million of BNB, which is the Binance native token, from the BSC token hub bridge. And that was right in an attempt to launder really over half a billion dollars, right? And so in essence, the way I kind of put quotations around steal, a good way to kind of describe this is if someone snuck into the, US Federal Reserve and started printing money and then walking away with it, right? So they didn't necessarily steal it from any specific individual or anyone that had owned that, but essentially what they did was printed more of that BNB and took it with them. So what
And
they did is then they
real quick,
used this.
Mata,
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
just for common terms here, replay attacks are super common in most technology. It's not only a blockchain attack. It's something that can happen in almost any web app. If you were to look at your Chase account, right? If you were to log in, use those credentials and tokens that you got to take out money, and then 2 days later use those same session tokens to do it again, and Chase allowed it, that's essentially what that replay attack is. So it's using the exact same authentication. So like you're saying, right? Like it's nobody's money that you're stealing. It's just, Chase is almost paying you too much in that sense, double the amount. Sorry, keep going.
No, that's really good context. I actually really appreciate that. It kind of brings it more into the real world as well, and not just kind of the crypto space. So super, super helpful. I think, to move on from that piece, right? They essentially they print this BNB, they walk away with it. And then what they're doing is actually utilizing what they did was they used this BNB as collateral in DeFi protocols, right? Things like Uniswap, SushiSwap, Curve Finance that we've talked about in the shows before, really to borrow $150 million worth of different stable coins, right? What they then did from there is they sent to various cross-chain bridges and then converted those into other cryptos, which they were then allowed to take with them, right? So I think the interesting part about this is it's not the first time we've seen a bridge hack. It's not the first time that, crypto in general in the space has been plagued with hackers, right? And so I think what was really important was kind of the way that BNB and the community and the validators responded, right? So on Thursday, I believe a lot of this news came out on Friday. So on Thursday of last week, BNB validators actually noticed some strange activity taking place on that BSC token hub, which again is one of the platform's bridges, where it was being utilized to mint those additional BNB tokens. So that's when BNB and validators actually elected to pause the BNB chain altogether to prevent damage to the ecosystem and really start to assess what do we do next, right? And so the BNB chain has about 25 upper 20s active validators. And so this was obviously an emergency shutdown. It's not necessarily anything new, but it has happened to a few chains lately, which we'll talk about as well. But essentially from there, right, they restarted the chain with the help from the validators, and what they started to do was introduce new governance structures, really to decide whether hacked funds should be frozen. And then there even is a little bit of detail, and I can get into this in a second, around what they might be doing just in general from the governance perspective. So what I thought was interesting is what was stated from the BNB team is that the BNB token is growing at a sustainable rate because these hackers didn't steal someone's money specifically, like we were just talking about. The BNB community is planning to include $2 million worth of BNB tokens in its upcoming burn this year as a way to bring it back down to parity. And essentially, I think we talk about this all the time with inflation, right? The more you print, it's essentially a supply and demand piece. The more you print, the more you're debasing that currency. And essentially, by burning that $2 million worth of BNB tokens, they're hoping to bring that back down and basically get rid of the effect that some of this had on the system itself.
And quick question, Mata, for BNB, is it something where they're at their total amount of coins dispersed or unlocked, or where are they at, I guess, in their unlock schedule for that?
Yeah,
chain?
let me look that up.
That's a great question.
Right now.
Because I think you could kind of see a difference between, if all the tokens are out there, right, that really is somebody's money that has to be burned. Whereas,
Totally.
if not, it could be something that's further down in the roadmap per se.
Can you see this? So this is coin market cap for BNB. The max supply, it looks like, is 200 million. They're at just under that, at 161, 162. So they're not quite at that max supply quite yet, but that circulating supply is about 81%, looks like.
And so I guess the question is, is that $2 million coming from BNB token that hasn't been circulating, or where does that come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would assume it's from that is circulating. But The question is then where does that come from, right? And so that's something that we'll need to keep an eye on, because I don't think that's been released. It wasn't something that I saw posted anywhere. So that's a really good question, though.
Yeah.
Right on the money.
I think the biggest questions to kind of run through is these were some that I came up with. I don't know if you all had any specific questions on this, but who's doing these hacks? It's, again, not one of the first bridge hacks that we've seen. Is it some specific group? Is it some specific individual? Is it a certain country? Those sorts of things. I don't know if you all had any sort of take on that. What I thought was interesting was kind of the stablecoin issuers and the power that they actually might have, right? So Tether actually said that they blacklisted the ETH wallet that received the USDT via that bridge chain that we talked about, right? And so it's interesting to kind of think through that, because it's okay, that's great for this sort of situation, right? But is it not a little bit concerning that we're able to kind of censor and have these centralized electors of what's good and what's bad? I think that's kind of what the crypto and blockchain community is really trying to get away from. And so I guess I wanted we don't necessarily have to talk about who hacked it, because I don't know if anyone truly knows unless you have specific ideas. But any thoughts kind of on the issuer power from the stablecoin side of things?
Yeah, I feel like it's, and obviously Soham's not here today, but he always makes good points about this. But right now, crypto is in this interesting kind of balance of some of the the highly touted and most speculative projects like Solana and stuff get criticized for being centralized. There's a lot of other different currencies that get heat for being too centralized. But I feel like right now, crypto is not at that point where everything can be decentralized, because if this had happened and everything was decentralized, the pace of it being fixed would be different. How it was addressed would be different. There'd be a lot more unknowns. And so it's almost like this kind of, balance that you're trying to keep where I don't know if crypto's at that point where we can afford to be fully decentralized, but we're kind of slowly moving towards that way. But I think obviously it's the goal that we all kind of envision, but at the same time, maybe, we do need centralization still for things like this, but I think it's something to think about.
No, that's a really great point. Maybe it's just the maturity piece, and you need to go through these kind of trials and tribulations in order to get to the point that we're hoping to. We would, I guess, just hope that the centralized electors don't just end up taking everything over, right? I guess that's kind of the hope in that sort of scenario where it's like we need them for now, but we're trying to get rid of them. Hopefully, they'll be the type of people that will relinquish power to,
Right.
be more
I
decentralized.
feel like there's so much to explore in this space of how do we respond to these type of attacks. Because I have a tweet from Woo Blockchain where they run through in the last year, 11 large cross-chain bridge attacks that have accumulated close to $2 billion worth. And I'll go ahead and pop that up on the screen. But it's ridiculous just, how often this happens and how commonplace this has become. And, I think it's where the major vulnerabilities are in, locked up assets on chain or in these bridges. And so, my question is are we attacking, this in different ways? Like with the BNB bridge hack here, is this something where, because I feel like we've heard this strategy used in other places where essentially they shut down the network. They try and talk through other governance options where they say, hey, let's allow more power into kind of the centralized party within, the ecosystem or network here on BNB. And we say, hey, we're going to give them the keys to the network. When they want to shut it down, they can shut it down. When they don't, let it go. So I don't know. It feels like there hasn't been enough time for opportunities or solutions in this space to be explored. But you can see this is like one of the biggest problems that we have. So yeah, we'll see how this kind of plays out. But it feels like the response that we get from these bridge hacks haven't evolved enough to really find a good solution, and it's just going to continue to keep happening.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's kind of like the crypto exchange hacks of before. That's kind of like the new age version of that, is these bridge hacks, right? So you'd hope in a similar format that they'll start to learn and adapt and make these updates so that, they're not as vulnerable here moving forward, right? It just seems to be that's the newest wave of like, okay, we need to interoperate between these different, crypto platforms, between these different currencies that we have. And the bridges are essentially kind of the way to do that, right? So that's what's hot right now from the hacker's perspective. And hopefully with all these hacks, right, you kind of can learn from your mistakes and learn from the bad things that happen, because obviously no one likes to hear these things, but maybe some of those bad things need to happen in order for us to get everything straight.